Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber. Our guest this week is Kurt Griffith. Kurt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russell.
Give us your life in a nutshell.
Well, I'm a New York City expat. We wandered down to Berkeley Springs in 2014. I was born and raised in New York City in one of the most integrated neighborhoods in the world, Coney Island, which is the very southern end of Brooklyn. I spent a brief decade in purgatory in the New York City suburbs, at which point economic trends made it untenable to stay. Our property taxes exceeded $12,600 for the year in 2014. When we first moved there, they were $5,000 in 2000.
Where'd you go to school in New York?
I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York.
That's one of the top art schools?
That's one of the top art schools in the country, which we share with in New York. We also share with Parsons, SVA, and FIT.
And what's been your life's work since you graduated from Pratt?
Okay. I've been a creative professional since I graduated. My degree is in graphic design and illustration, but I fairly swiftly gravitated into graphic design primarily. In the 90s, I started to pick up web design as an outgrowth of graphic design.
And what brought you to Morgan County?
Well, I did mention the property taxes. And we moved into. I had a house fire in our place in Brooklyn, and so we ended up moving into Rockland County, which was affordable at the time. It was also one of the best school districts in New York State. I had two sons. I had two younger sons at the time. However, property taxes in 2000 were about $5,000. Consequence of the Bush tax cuts, property taxes in most of America more than doubled in 10 years. What happened was explained to me that the federal government started paying for less things that towns and counties must provide. One of the top ones being Medicare, and Medicaid, which are not budget items for local government. They're invoices. They have to pay it. And so their primary taxation authority is property taxes, which is democratic in a sense that you only pay income tax if you have income, but you pay property taxes if you have a roof. So it doesn't matter if you're employed, underemployed, corporate vice president, a Walmart floor stomper, retired, disabled, elderly, single mom, student. It doesn't matter. You're paying property taxes either directly as a homeowner or as a portion of your rent.
All right, so you moved here.
We moved here.
But you could have moved. A lot of New Yorkers moved to Florida or to the Sun Belt. You moved here, why?
There are a couple of spiritual communities in the area. I'm involved with Four Quarters Interfaith, which is just northwest of us in Arnold, Pennsylvania. I'm involved with the Nativist community down in the Charlestown, West Virginia area. Berkeley Springs is roughly equidistant. It is also an artistic community. Look at this place. I mean, we're here at the Ice House. One of the first things I did when we arrived here was I joined the Chamber of Commerce and I joined ICE and I joined Morgan's Art Council. That was an ideal way for a designer to start meeting people. I also got involved in the granary straight away. That was a wonderful community of creative and performing people. And so there's all these things going on here. And the apocryphal story I like to tell people, when we unloaded our Penske truck at Berkeley Springs Self Storage, we hired a local fellow to help us unpack. And he's being a good American and griping about his taxes. I asked him, well, what are your taxes like? And he goes, they're $400. They're going to raise them, $600. They're going to raise them next year. And I go, really? Ours are $12. And now he's got sympathy for me. He said, $1,200? I go, no, $12,000. And the gobsmacked look on his face was worth the cost of admission.
That was your property tax in New York City?
Yes, in New York State, in Rockland County. $12,600 in 2014. Now, my income as a self-employed designer varied about 3 to 5% year over year from 2000 to 2014.
Well, you only did that 1 year. You couldn't afford that. That's why you left.
That's why we left. Yeah, I just do that Excel spreadsheet, have a blue line and a red line that did that. It crossed at about 2019, and then I heard the voice of Master Po from Kung Fu in the background. It was, grasshopper, time to get the blip out.
What?
Because what would have happened with those numbers by 2025, mutual funds, IRAs, savings gone.
So you're a refugee from New York City.
Yeah, in
New
a
York.
sense, yeah, an
You're a
expat.
refugee.
Yeah.
And obviously the politics are starkly different.
To a degree. I mean, New York is considered a very blue place. It is. That does not mean there are not conservatives there, and that does not mean there are not Republicans there. There certainly are. Doesn't mean that there are not liberals and Democrats here. Just because of the way we draw electoral maps. Blue state, red state. I saw a very interesting demographic. I'm a design guy, so I find these things very interesting. I saw a map that colored in the counties in shades of blue and purple and red based on the vote perception, on voter balances. Now, there are some very red places out there, and there are some very blue places, but the overwhelming majority of America is purple nation. Okay? But if the state goes 51 to 49% on the electoral map, it gets colored in red or blue, not purple.
On that map you were looking at, what's the color of Morgan County?
Morgan County is kind of a deep magenta, and Berkeley Springs is kind of a purple patch in it, and I'm okay with that. One of the things that has happened is this vilification of both sides by both sides, which I find to be unfair and it's unrealistic. They're all citizens. The other thought is that people
How deep is that, by the way? How deep is that vilification? From your experience in talking with people in Morgan County about it.
Person to person, not particularly. Group versus group, tremendously, which is kind of a paradox. When we abstract the other side as a anonymous them, we can tell all kind of horrible things about the other side. We call them libtards, we call them wingnuts, But when we're working person to person, I don't particularly care how you voted. Are you a decent guy?
Do you find the vilification deeper online than face to face?
Oh, heck yes. Online is tremendous. And I found on a Facebook conversation, I'm not a big fan of Facebook, but as a designer, I kind of have to be there because that's where the eyeballs are, which is how a lot of people end up justifying dealing with social media and its problems. I found myself in one conversation, I was called a wingnut and a libtard in the same conversation thread. That was illuminating. Okay.
Libtard, for our viewers who don't know the term, is short for liberal retard.
Yes.
And wingnut usually is a libtard calling out a right-wing conservative.
Yes.
That's, right-wing wingnut.
Yeah. The big thing I'm seeing right now is that the right vilifies the left for all the horrible things that the left and the ruling class have done to them. The left vilifies the right for racism, sexism, bigotry, misogyny, authoritarian proto-fascism. And strictly speaking, and that isn't necessarily, that's not productive, it's not helpful. It gets in the way of the fact that the nation voted for Donald Trump in a weird way. He picked up about 37% of the popular vote compared to Secretary Clinton's 38, but they're in the right states. But that's not quite 60% of the vote. What happened to the other 40? They stayed home. They were completely they're disgusted, discouraged, disinterested, disenfranchised, and disenchanted from voting for either candidate. Why not? They felt they had nothing to gain by voting for either one of them. Okay. Why did so many Obama voters flip for Trump? Because they felt abandoned and unrepresented. Okay. Now, about the racism, sexism, misogyny, and proto-fascism, and authoritarianism, that gets in the way of understanding why are those things rising? Why did that come up as this big issue. The left likes to think that is the reason. It's like, no, that's all in the mix. And someone say, well, it's economic insecurity and the fact that a large swath of America feels utterly unrepresented in Washington. And that's not the whole thing either. But when you have people who are in distress and people who don't see a future, who feel abandoned and left behind, that is fertile ground to plant every kind of hate you can imagine. And while I am deeply sympathetic to citizens everywhere, I've got no respect for a party that's pressed those buttons with absolute cynicism. I believe that the DNC and RNC don't particularly care much about racism, but they happily use those issues to manipulate the voting public.
Now, you just said that you have no respect for that party.
I don't respect either the Democratic or the Republican national parties in a particular way. They both parties use social issues, very divisive social issues, to manipulate the electorate, but they vote and pass laws supporting neoliberal, neoconservative policies that are barely that can be barely differentiated. And
by
those,
neoliberal and neoconservative, you really mean controlled by corporate interests.
Controlled by corporate interests and oligarchs. I had an interesting conversation with a friend
An
of mine.
oligarch means what?
An oligarch are essentially plutocrats that basically are predatory upon both the society and the marketplace.
Plutocrat is what?
They plutocrats are extraordinarily wealthy. When they become oligarchs, they basically are predatorily wealthy. They seek wealth and power and control just to seek wealth, power, and control in a destructive, consumptive manner.
Well, I want to get back to the no respect for either party.
Yeah.
Are you a member of either party?
No, sir. I'm an
Are you
independent.
registered?
When I'm a registered voter, I registered as an independent when we moved here. I abandoned the Democratic Party when I moved because, as I told several telemarketers, if the Democratic Party stood up for democratic principles, I might still be one.
Right. So you're not a member of either party, and actually a big percentage of voters in Morgan County and West Virginia are independents.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the political advantages of West Virginia. We have semi-open primaries, which means that if we see a particularly interesting or particularly reprehensible candidate, we can vote in that primary to either promote or discourage that candidate. We can't vote in both, but we can vote where we figure we can make a difference.
Right. I want to get back to the vilification because from what I've heard about you, you seem to be one of the few who are active politically here who speak out against the vilification. Yeah. Do you find that to be the case?
To a degree, more than most folk. We get caught up in the media view of things and the pundit view. I prefer a historian view. Now I can tell by looking at it, I'm a mixed person. My mother is darker than me. My dad is lighter. They got married to each other in Chicago in the 1950s. Brooklyn is not like Chicago. Brooklyn is a swirling melting pot of humanity, and no neighborhood is 100% anything. Coney Island, when I grew up there in the 60s, was Italian, Irish, Black, Puerto Rican, Russian, Jewish, some Asians, and a fair amount of Russian. Okay. But almost the entirety was working class, which is a tremendous social leveler. So I never heard the word, pardon the use, nigger or honky, until I was about 9 years old in Gary, Indiana. Now, Gary, Indiana is like Chicago, a checkerboard, black squares, white squares, no brown squares. So I come with a slightly different perspective about this. And so people get very uptight about the surge in racism that we've seen in the last few years. And it's become kind of blatant, particularly the empowerment and the emboldening of white supremacists. Yeah, it's troublesome, it's worrisome. Historical perspective. It's a little bit of backsliding, but I grew up in the 60s, okay, through one of the more brutal civil rights struggles of that century. That was on the heels, that 25-year struggle was on the heels of 50 years of Jim Crow. on the heels of 400 years of chattel slavery. Okay, want some history, folks? Okay, we live in the town of Berkeley Springs. We are adjacent to Berkeley County. Over that way is the city of Berkeley. That's named after William Lord Berkeley, the second crown governor of the Virginia colony before even the state, before West Virginia existed. He, in his infinite wisdom and royalist sentiment, passed the first laws in the colonies permitting the chattel ownership of a human being in the 1600s. Nice guy.
Did you know that history coming in?
No.
And so you learned that history here.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable in Morgan County?
Sure.
You feel
Yep.
free, comfortable, you can be a citizen, speak your mind without antagonism?
Not entirely. I try to be polite and I try to be even-handed. Okay. It's good, and it's good practice in general. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk. And so much of our political dialogue in the current incarnation is devoted to people being jerks to each other.
Right. And a lot of that is driven by social media.
Yes.
How do we get out of it?
Realize that that everything on social media is an opinion. Facebook in particular, users are not the customers. We're the product. Facebook is a privately owned, multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation that exists to sell advertising. Okay, users are there to provide psychometric data for Facebook's real customers, which are advertisers. Some of those advertisers are political organizations and political players, including, as we discovered in the 2016 election, the former Soviet Union, Russia,
right? But
and Ukraine,
all
those things.
You're not going to boycott Facebook. You're going to stay in it because your business depends on it.
Business depends on it, and a lot of people I know are connected there.
But in our last couple minutes, I wanted to ask you this: how do we, putting social media aside, how do we get out of this vilification where basically people are lobbing Molotov cocktails at each other, and then get down to a one-on-one conversation where we could realize both parties for what they are, corporate controlled, corporate dominated, and build a new political movement?
Well, just like this conversation with individual humans, and not buying into vilifying people. So if you can ask yourself this at any given time. When was the last time you convinced anybody of anything by screaming at them and calling them nasty names?
Do you find here in Morgan County that one side or the other is worse about vilification?
It's hard to say because I'm even 5 years in, I'm still a relative newcomer, and I have seen some interesting political currents here. Here, mostly having to do with political momentum, just in the established political trends of who's always kind of been in charge and what they do. But in general, it seems to be not so out in the day-to-day world, not particularly. I've noticed that people that even Trump voters, there's a lot of them here, are not particularly attracted to Trump himself. They were more disenchanted with the establishment. And that doesn't get talked about enough in the media. It's all about Trump's so awful, Trump is this, Trump is that. I'm from New York. I know that. Trump's always been that guy. Okay, look into his history. Four bankruptcies. He's shelved $1 billion. He doesn't pay his contractors. He rips off his customers. He's committed frauds since the 80s. Okay, he's always been that guy. The apprentice Trump doesn't exist. That's a reality show character. Okay, and New York tried to warn you all. Okay, most presidential candidates sweep their home states. Trump was soundly defeated in New York because people knew who he was.
But have you met people like yourself who want to start out with, let's stop the vilification and let's talk person to person?
Generally, but it's still a minority. It's a growing minority because people are discovering that the screaming and shouting isn't helping. It's only making things worse.
The screaming's not helping.
Yeah, it's only making things worse. Okay. Now, to be sure, West Virginia, I mean, I drove around a little bit during the campaign. Fair number of Bernie signs, a lot of Trump signs. A lot of them are still out there. I did not see a single Clinton sign during the campaign. Okay, if the Democratic Party needs to understand that they abandoned their core constituency, which was working Americans.
Well, so did Bernie because he endorsed her. He endorsed Hillary.
Well, that was a political tactic to stay alive. Now, one criticism of the DNC is that they were all in for coronating Hillary Clinton, did not treat Bernie Sanders well or seriously or fairly, and the Clinton campaign devoted more attention, resources, and energy to suppressing the Sanders campaign and to taking Mr. Trump seriously, and they paid for it. The DNC didn't even campaign in West Virginia.
Right. One last thing. What are the hopes of building a non-democratic, non-Republican, independent movement that crosses party lines and that brings in people to upend corporate domination?
Patience, determination, and thick-skinnedness. Okay. The civil rights struggle in the 60s took 25 years. Okay. The peace movement took 15 years. Okay. This isn't going to happen in one election cycle. Okay. If you want to see bipartisan cooperation in Washington, see a viable independent movement or a viable third party start to arise. The Republicans and the Democrats will close ranks to freeze them out. Patience, persistence, thick-skinnedness. This may not even happen in my lifetime, but if you want to preserve the Republic, think about being in for the long haul. Don't think about November. Think about 2050.
Kurt Griffith, to be continued.
Certainly.
Thank you so much for coming.
Good time.
And thank you for watching This Week in Morgan County.